Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, I'm Alex, and this is my channel Frank Fiction, where I talk about books and the book publishing industry. Bubby came for a visit. So I received a huge list of Q&A questions on my Booktube newbie tag video. Thank you, Dad. Some of the questions that I got are going to require very detailed responses, so they're going to get their own video, but these questions that I have today are ones that I feel like I can answer very quickly in just a little chat video where you can get to know me a little bit better, and if you have any other questions, please feel free to post them down in the comments. So the first question is, how do I get cozy to read? My favorite time to read is in the early morning when I haven't done anything else with my day, or if I'm reading in between doing chores. I love a good sweet cranberry tea with some sort of savory breakfast like a croissant or an English muffin, but if I drink coffee, which I also enjoy, I like my coffee to be unsweetened if it's hot, and so then I will want some sort of sweet dessert to go along with that. So I might want to have it with donuts, for example, or some type of sweet oatmeal. That really gets me in the reading mood for some reason. So I have this very comfy chair that's next to me, and I love to sit in it because it's right next to my window, and Barker's bed hangs out right down next to me, but sometimes he'll get up in the chair with me as well. So that definitely gets me good and relaxed. Second question I have is, would you rather read the first page of a book or the last one? I personally would prefer to read the first page over the last one because the first page is the hook, that's the grip of the story where the author is trying to bring you in. If I were to read the last page of a book, I have no context for what's going on, so I definitely would pick the first page. The third question is, can you name a book that kept you up at night? I think this is a great question because it can mean one of two things. It could mean, have I read a book that I stayed up to finish, or did I read a book that I finished and then I couldn't stop thinking about it and it made it hard to sleep? And I have an answer for both of those. So the book that I stayed up to finish is The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I actually read that book in one day, which is not typical for me at all. I usually take at least a few days to finish a book. And for a book I read that I couldn't stop thinking about, that would be Recursion by Blake Crouch. The fourth question is, if you could change one book and save one character's life, which book would you change and which character would you save? This is a huge spoiler for the Saga series. If you are currently reading it and you are not up to date and you don't want to know what's going to happen, please just skip forward to the fifth question because I don't want to ruin it for you. It was a huge shocker to me. That would be Marco. His death was absolutely horrible to me, and I was gutted when it happened. So I read the trade editions of the comics. I don't buy the comics individually. So when I got the trade where that happened, that literally was like the last page of the book. I ended on that. And then it took years for the creators to continue the series because COVID was going on. So I ended on knowing that Marco died and then having no clue what was going to happen after that for like 3 years. I was devastated. The fifth question is, would you rather read a book that was well written but had a terrible story, or the other way around? For me, I guess it would depend on what you consider to be terrible, because terrible could mean that you have a very unlikable main character, like in The Goldfinch, or it could mean that the plot itself is bad. I don't know if this is a hot take or not, but I'm not sure if I believe that there's such thing as a story that's written terribly with a good plot. I think that a book that's written poorly can have a good premise, but that's not necessarily the same thing. I've read many books that had good premises, like the description on the back of the book that tells you what the story is about. You go, oh, that's really interesting, and then you read it and it's written horribly. They're books that I end up hating because they took something that could have been a really fun and unique idea and they ruined it. So I guess I would go with well written but a bad story, because at least if it's written well, I don't necessarily have to like what happens. Question 6 is, what was your favorite childhood book? So I touched on this a little bit in a previous video, but I read the Charlie Bone series, which was huge for me. I read Dragon Rider. I loved the Geronimo Stilton books. I liked The Magic Tree House. I read Diary of a Wimpy Kid. I mean, there were quite a few. I don't know that I can necessarily say that I had a favorite book, but Charlie Bone was definitely higher on that list than a lot of others. The seventh question is, if I could choose a skill or a special ability from one of the characters in a book I read, what skill or ability would I choose to have? This question was a little difficult for me to answer, but I know what I picked the fastest, like what came to my brain the quickest, so I suppose that would be my answer. In the book Slaughterhouse-Five, the main character is able to move back and forth on the timeline of his life from the time that he's born to the time that he dies. But unfortunately, he can't control that ability. So if I could pick an ability, I would pick to be able to move along the timeline of my life to any given point that I want, but I would be able to control it. I would just really like to be able to see my dogs again, Ash and Bella, that have passed away, and also my family members that have passed. It would just be nice to sit with them for a little while. Question 8 is, which book do you think is the most overrated? And I have 2 answers for this. So the first one is The Tattooist of Auschwitz. I ended up reading that and absolutely hated it. I thought it was creepy. I thought that it was romanticized in a way that was incredibly disrespectful to the people who were in the concentration camps. And I know that the author ended up interviewing the man who is the main character, but his wife wasn't alive at the time to be part of the interview, so it was kind of his take on what had happened. Of course, fictionalized because it wasn't a biography, it was a novel. And I just thought it was incredibly distasteful and I didn't appreciate it at all. So I gave it 2 stars. Hi all, it's Editing Alex. I am about to talk about a book that is extremely popular and I describe the writing as childish. I want you to know that if it's a book that you really enjoy, I by no means think that you're childish for liking it. It's simply just a book that I didn't jive with very well. And then the other one is going to be The Throne of Glass. I read that book when I was 16 or 17, so I was the target audience of the people who were supposed to be reading it. I was a young adult, I guess. I hated it. I thought it was childish and poorly written, and I didn't like that there weren't any actual stakes in the book. It didn't feel like there were to me anyway. I like books with tangible stakes. That book was like a 1 or a 2. I can't even remember what rating I gave it, but I remember that it was very low. The 9th question is, would I rather read a book with a very unclear ending that makes me wonder what happened, or a heartbreaking ending? Believe it or not, I would pick a heartbreaking ending because I believe it's a great thing when books elicit strong emotions from people. I think sometimes we need that catharsis, and that can come from several different places. It can come from printed or painted art, it can come from movies or TV shows, it can come from books. I think that for me, my greatest sense of catharsis is when it comes from books. I think unclear endings are really good for thought experiments and debates and having discussions with other people, because you can see somebody else's interpretation of the end of a book, but it's not the same because, yeah, I might be able to discuss what I think happened at the end of the book, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I feel strongly about it. It's just something that you can talk about. Does that make sense? And the last question for this video is there a character from one of your books that you would like to meet? And my answer is, of course. There have been several in books that I've read that I'm sure that I would love to meet, but if I had to pick one, I would pick Arthur Parnassus from The House in the Cerulean Sea. He is a very protective and soft-hearted person while also being extremely intelligent, and I can imagine just sitting and having a nice long conversation with him. And that is all I have for you for this video, so thank you so much for spending this time with me and getting to know me a little bit better. I would love to hear about you. Please feel free to post your answers to any of these questions down in the comment below. I would also really appreciate it if you gave this video a thumbs up or subscribe to my channel if you'd like to see more content. It means a lot. And as always, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day or evening, that you all stay safe out there, and I'll see you next time.